So for Senator Dodd, he has talked about that this center is very much about human rights, but that often in America we think of human rights as being a international issue, but in fact, they are a domestic issue. And I am joined now by a former Senator Chris Dodd on the phone as he's taking a break. I know you're busy with this presidential visit, but we so appreciate you taking the time to talk to our viewers about what's happening today. Thank you, Senator. Good to hear from you.
Not at all, Kara. Thank you very much for asking.
Yeah, you know, for those who don't know, part of this big cornerstone of what's happening today with the presidential visit is he's going to be there at the dedication of the Dodd Human Rights Center. And I was just sharing with our viewers some of the history that you were just 1 year old when your father went off to be a prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials and prosecute Nazi criminals. So human rights has really been something that's been a cornerstone not only of your upbringing, but your whole career in public service.
Well, you kind of mentioned and again, a lot of it was born by my father's experience. He was very young at the time. He was 38 years old. My father's been gone for 52 years. He passed away at a very young age. But Nuremberg was sort of a life-altering experience for him in 1945 and 46. He was a prosecutor at the Justice Department, a very good one, in fact, and he had a great reverence for Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, who President Franklin Roosevelt had asked to become the leading prosecutor for the United States at the Nuremberg trials. And my father's experience becoming his number two at the trials really was the life-altering experience. He saw firsthand. He introduced the films to the Army Signal Corps, the liberation of the concentration camps. In fact, Kara, it's ironic because it wasn't planned this way, but today actually marks the eve of the sentences being handed out at Nuremberg 75 years ago today.
Wow.
21 defendants were waiting in their cells for the sentences to be meted out. Eight of those defendants were executed of the 21. I think around 10 of them were actually given extended prison sentences, and 3 were completely acquitted. And it was Robert Jackson who, at the outset of that trial in 1945, laid the groundwork for the importance of the rule of law. And he said, and I'll quote it for you because I learned this quote at my dining room table years and years ago, talking about the Allies. Justice Jackson said that 4 great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stayed the hand of vengeance by voluntarily submitting their captive enemies to the judgment of the rule of law, the greatest tribute that power ever paid to reason. And so it was the victory of the rule of law, which is what we cared so deeply about. And so even though these are the most horrific criminals that committed beyond imaginable crimes, some of the worst in all of recorded history, we gave them a fair trial, something which they never gave their victims throughout that conflict. And that had a huge impression on my father's life. And a year later, he wrote to my mother, as he did every day from Nuremberg, some 400 letters. He wrote to her and said, "I'll never do anything as important again in my life. And I hope my children one day will be proud of what I've done and cite the precedent and the law that we made here at Nuremberg." Joe Biden is that kind of a person. I've cared a lot about it, but I've served with Joe Biden. I have great respect for him. We have a great friendship. And he has, throughout his entire public life, demonstrated his deep commitment, as my father did in his public life, to the rule of law and to making a difference on human rights. And so I've enjoyed working with him. I'm honored that he came to Connecticut today and engaged in a conversation about child care, which is very important, but also is coming out to our flagship university to dedicate this Center for Human Rights. It means a lot to me, but it also means a lot to this university. It means a lot to the country that we have a president who cares so deeply as he does about these issues.
And Senator Dodd, we know that this is actually it's a big deal for you. Not only the second time a sitting president has visited the University of Connecticut. It was Bill Clinton back in, I believe, 1995. I've had that date right. So a big deal for you personal.
Kara, that visit by President Clinton was 25 years ago today.
Today. There's a lot of synchronicity, yes, going on here with the eve of the Nuremberg sentences and that visit. But so you could have never imagined when you were sitting at that table as a young boy that you would be here today. But why do you say today, I know this center is so important to you, but some people might think, oh, this is a far-off issue. These human rights are something that happened offshore. You say really human rights are much more about a domestic issue, and that even having the Family Medical Leave Act, as you work so hard to write, is a human rights issue.
Absolutely, and so that's a great point you're making, Kara, because most of us grew up believing that human rights were just an international issue. But what we've all learned, obviously, is we have a lot of work to do to become that more perfect union that our founders talked about. And certainly understanding what people's rights are, what your rights are, how to be willing to stand up and defend those rights, even with people we disagree with, the freedom of speech, for instance. You're absolutely correct as well. Things like the Family Medical Leave Act, good child care, a child tax credit and so forth to help those who are desperately trying to live from day to day. All those involve rights as well. We believe in this country that you have a right to health care and a right to a good education. You don't have a right to everything, but there are things we have rights to. We have a right to be treated decently and fairly in our justice system. And so, very much, as you've suggested, much of what we're doing here today is not just about what's happened in some foreign country, but what a better job we can do it here at home.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about University of Connecticut is really the largest education program on human rights at a public university anywhere. So this is helping UConn, but also talk about what people will learn and study there and what will come out of this.
Well, it's really quite something. And again, I'm deeply grateful. It was the president of UConn going back some 30 years ago, John Castine, who called me one day and said, I was trying to figure out what to do with my father's papers, particularly from Nuremberg. And John Castine was an archivist by training. And he said, would you be willing to give your father's papers here to the University of Connecticut? That's where this journey began, Kara, by his request this many years ago. And so the university accepted the challenge. We moved forward. But today we're the only public university in the country with a master's and an undergraduate degree in human rights. That is something to be deeply proud of, but we're not so jealous about it that we don't want other universities to do what we're doing. We'd love it if more universities did, and I hope they will. So today it's a major and a minor at the university. There are, I think, some 200 students who are already involved in it. There are 40 members of the faculty who teach at the Human Rights Institute, which is, of course, the program that dedicated to human rights. So it's a great reputation. Our university, our flagship university, has a great reputation for many things. We're now going to have a great reputation and have been building one over the years, that we care deeply about this subject matter and we can educate the next generation of people who care about it and fight for it as well.
You're out of Congress now, but you can look back and have that bird's eye view. I know you've had a wonderful friendship with President Biden, considering him very close, and he's talking about doing something pretty ambitious with this Build Back Better campaign, and even as much as, free universal childcare and free pre-K, or at least not paying more than 7% of your income. And you look at what would need to pass it. I guess he just acknowledged you're probably not going to get $3.2 trillion. But what's the path forward, if I can ask you, since you can be referee outside of the ring now?
Well, and I appreciate that definition, because that's basically, I watch it carefully, obviously, because I care deeply about the institution of the United States Congress. My father and I served collectively 52 years in the United States Congress between the two of us. And so there's a great reverence for the institution and the people who served there. And I served with wonderful people, remarkable people, great patriots, Democrats and Republicans. And it saddens me deeply to see the kind of polarization that's occurring. In a democracy, people have to compromise and work together. We're not an autocratic system here. We're a diverse country. And in a diverse society where democracy is important, you need to be willing to sit down and try and work things out. That's not happening as it should, in my view, not just on these issues, but many others as well. And so we need to get back to that point where we put our democracy at risk. And that's not an idle statement I just made. I deeply worry about that very, very much. So I'm positive about it. I think, again, this is not the darkest moment in our country's history. There have been far more serious ones. And previous generations have come up with good answers and solved problems. And I'm confident that will happen again. I hope I don't sound like a Pollyanna, but I believe that very deeply. There are still good people serving in the Congress, Democrats and Republicans. And my hope is they'll be able to work together to get things done for the people of this country.
Well, Senator Dodd, we so appreciate you spending some time with us. I know we're going to get to see you as we continue live coverage around 4 o'clock tonight when President Biden, your friend, will be speaking at the new Dodd Human Rights Center. And we really appreciate you taking the time to share some information about what it is and even a course of study, perhaps, for that next generation of leaders. Thank you for.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear from you, and good luck today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Talk to you soon, Kara. Bye-bye.
Bye, Senator.